Hello, welcome to Please Read Your Book. My name's Carl, and in today's video, I've got two extremely different stories of two very different lives set in Bangkok, Thailand. Okay, so welcome back. Like I said in the intro, today I'm going to review two books that are both set here in Bangkok, Thailand. I'm here in Thailand now. I'm on a holiday. It's Chinese New Year, so I got to get out of Shanghai, and I'm here in Bangkok for a few days, headed off to the beach soon. So let's get into the books. The first one is a nonfiction. It's called The Damage Done by Warren Fellows. The second book is Bangkok Days by Lawrence Osborne. This is a novel, but it has a bit of memoir and quite a bit of nonfiction in it. So first book, Warren Fellows, The Damage Done. So the title makes an allusion to the Neil Young song, The Needle and the Damage Done, which is all about heroin. And that's no mistake because Warren Fellows was a drug courier. He was arrested in 1978 with 8.5 kilograms of heroin here in Bangkok, Thailand. He had been a drug courier before. He'd made a few runs before into Australia, so he kind of had a reputation in the Australian underworld, I guess, that he could do this kind of work. And he willingly embraced it, took part in it, and he got caught. Ironically, the night before he got caught, he woke up in the middle of the night and just had a feeling that it just wasn't going to work. He had the urge to just dump the heroin and try to run away and flee. He felt there were too many complications in the job, there were too many red flags, and it just wasn't going to work. So he hesitated at that moment, though. He says the suitcase wasn't in his room at the time. And he thought, well, okay, I'll just sort it out in the morning because he was working with another guy. But morning came and they got arrested. So when they get arrested, this is when things really get ugly. And this is where we start to see the damage done. So the Thai police who arrest him, they use a lot of physical abuse. They beat him and the other guy. There's a lot of psychological abuse. They purposely sort of gaslight and confuse these guys, which is strange because they were caught red-handed and they'd been under surveillance. So it's kind of like a weird, kind of weird, almost menacing kind of approach to the whole thing. But it really sets the tone for what is to come, which is basically 12 years of living hell. So it takes him a while to get sentenced, and he's moved to a few different jails and small prisons in Bangkok City, which are pretty bad, pretty unpleasant, obviously overcrowded, hygiene is an issue, but it's nothing compared to what is coming for him. So once he's sentenced, he's moved into the first prison that he's in, and he and a couple other guys very quickly try to escape. Doesn't work, obviously. They get caught. They get sent to another prison, which is much more difficult, very notorious, called Mahachai prison. This is where it really gets gruesome and terrible. There's like constant fights going on. There's just all sorts of horrible stuff. And a lot of it, the prison guards know of it. Sometimes they encourage these things to be happening. Obviously, sometimes they're going to profit for it. And I know these things are not unique to Thai prisons. I'm not saying Thai prisons are the only prisons with these problems, but the conditions are absolutely horrific. And I think it's important, there's two things that are important before I go any further to remember here. So the year is 1978. Thailand is a very different place then compared to now. And I have to apologize, I think there's a party outside right now. So it's been really hard to make this video because it's just been so noisy. Thailand is a very, very different place back then. It was under very harsh military rule. There had been quite a few quite a few coup attempts throughout the 70s, student uprisings, very violent time in Thailand, particularly in Bangkok. And the police were very heavy-handed. They still are, but they're much more subtle about it now. Nowadays they would never, even if you were caught, I think if you were caught now with that much heroin, you wouldn't be beaten, right away during your interrogation the way they beat these guys now. So very different atmosphere back then. And the main thing to remember, though, is just that we often have this vision of Bangkok as a really modern, developed city, this sort of like 21st century, the Asian mega city kind of thing. But it's also a very poor city, and Thailand is still a very poor country. And how that relates to this is that I don't think people are sometimes prepared to realize or understand what that means in terms of like living conditions and how bad things can really be. So when he's in this prison, like hygiene, it just doesn't happen. Washing and showering and those kinds of things, it just doesn't happen. They're very rarely are they fed properly. They're extremely malnourished prisoners. They oftentimes can't even get clean drinking water. Some of this is by design, meaning it's done on purpose by the guards to try to punish people or to try to extract more information and things like that. Some of it is just the way it is, so it's sort of like a pick your poison kind of thing. So yeah, and just to sort of like illustrate or underscore how bad it was, within a year of his sentence, he becomes a heroin addict. And that's kind of some poetic justice there. So he's caught being a drug courier. He's not a drug user, he's just a drug courier. But he chooses to become a heroin addict while in prison. And it's really, this is the part that blows my mind. Like, you think of drugs, I mean, you need money to have drugs, right? And when you're in prison, you don't have a job, you don't have money. So how are people, it's just weird that the money that they do have, they spend it on drugs. It just blows, it's just weird. But I think really the point here, though, is just that it shows just how bleak and how terrible things were for these guys, that they would willingly choose to do something that they know is horrible, becoming heroin addict, using heroin. They know it's horrible. Many of them were selling it or dealing it, weren't users before, but choose to become users. And they're doing it just to take their mind off of things and just to escape. And not like at a party, take your mind off of things, but just to like literally just shut down, just shut it off, just try and numb everything. That's really how bad it is. There's two incidents in prison that he described that really stand out as particularly horrible. One is there's later in his sentencing, he's in a third prison, which is maybe not physically as brutal as Mahachai. The nickname for the prison is Big Tiger, but psychologically, this one is really awful. And there's one incident where there's a group of foreign prisoners in this prison, and one of them has been in for a long time, and he's been a very good prisoner, and he has some privileges. He's able to keep a kitten in his cell, and his family's been sending him cat food to give to the kitten. And of course, the other prisoners don't like this. And they joke, but they're serious when they say that the cat is eating better than they are. So one day while he's out, somehow they get into his cell, meaning a guard lets them in, and they hang the kitten. And they leave it hanging there. I mean, it's dead. They kill it. They hang it to death, and they leave it hanging in a cell till he comes back and he sees it. And then, obviously he's upset and crying about it. They cut the cat down from the rope, and then they skin it, and then they eat it, and they make sure that he sees and knows that they ate it. That's just really awful, really just awful. And that really just like crushes this guy psychologically. The other incident that really stood out to me as just particularly like really cruel. In Mahachai prison, the guards stir things up between two, I think, yeah, between two gangs within the prison. And they basically start a riot. They know they've started a riot. And during the riot, they encourage a group of prisoners to rape other prisoners. But rape is really frowned upon within the prison, as it should be. But these guards encourage it. So then the guards know who did the raping. Then afterwards, when everything's settled down, the riot, everyone's back in their cells, they take the rapists out into the center of the prison and then execute them in front of everyone else. Which is just like unbelievable. It's just so awful that they would orchestrate that whole thing and then execute those guys in front of everyone else too. It's just, I mean, it's just like mind blowing. And I bring this up. Actually, let me talk about something else, and then I'll talk about why I'm bringing it up. So finally, he's throughout his term. There's another psychological ploy, in that sometimes they'll tell him, you're going to be freed. You're going to get this king's pardon, which just never happens, you know. And it happens. They sort of like do this to sort of to play with him. And it happens enough that he just never believes it anymore when they say it to him. And then when it's time, when he does get the king's pardon, he doesn't believe it. And a group of missionaries come into the prison to tell him, no, it's true, you've got it. You're going to be released on this day. And he still doesn't believe it. And he does get released. There's more sort of trickery in him getting out of Thailand. It's not so easy. It's not like you just get a ride to the airport and then you're gone. You know, he's got to kind of go through these different channels, and the police, at some point, there's a miscommunication while he's being transferred from prison to the local jail and then waiting to fly out. There's a miscommunication, and the prison system thinks that he's lost, that he just like ran away somehow. And there's like the search for him in the city, in Bangkok, which is just goes to show like how things are. Yeah, so he ends up going back to Australia, has a really hard time reintegrating into society because he doesn't say it directly, but the abuse that he endured in the prison really deeply, you know, traumatized him. So it's a very good book. It's very interesting. I mean, as disturbing as some of the stuff I've talked about is, it's written about quite well. It's not graphic in any way. It doesn't try to shock or anything like that. It's actually written quite well and quite tastefully and quite thoughtfully in many sections. I've read some reviews where people kind of roast him a bit and try to take him down, saying like, well, you're a terrible person for being a drug courier, you deserve everything you got. I just don't agree with that at all. Two wrongs never make a right. And you just have to ask yourself, what is the purpose of, you know, of putting someone on trial and of putting them in prison? Or are we shouldn't one of the things that comes from justice be some sort of rehabilitation, so that, you know, there are things that are learned from this? Or is it strictly just to extract punishment, you know? So something to think about there. But I think it also presents an experience of Thailand that doesn't get discussed enough. And when it does get discussed, it's kind of just sensationalized a bit, with kind of the banged up abroad kind of nonsense stuff. So what I'm trying to say here is that there's often a very romanticized image that's projected and marketed, obviously for tourism purposes, of Thailand and other countries too, but Thailand is what we're talking about here, of, you know, the land of smiles. Everything is so easygoing, the people are so happy and nice and polite, and, you know, everyone just loves it. And to a certain extent that's true, but I think what a lot of people don't realize is there is a very dark side, a very dark underbelly to Thailand. the simple fact that these kinds of prisons existed and still exist, and that the prison system, like I just said before, the prison system here is really about punishment. And the people who go to prison are not wealthy, they're not middle class, they are poor people who commit crimes. Okay, and no, we can't question that, but we do have to question, like, why would we just literally just torture someone? You know, what does that say about a society? So I think it's something that people kind of need to think about and need to be aware of. Just not to say that it's all bad, but let's remember there's, two sides to everything. Speaking of two sides to everything, that leads us to Bangkok Days by Lawrence Osborne, which presents an extremely different experience and an extremely different view and vision of living in Thailand. So this is a book about a group of expatriates. It's kind of told just through the point of view of just one, but he's always got some expatriate friends these guys come to Thailand on, a holiday, or they're backpacking, or they're kind of gone on tour, and they realize that they can live here very cheap, so they decide to stay. They pick up various different kinds of work that they can get as foreigners, usually something to do with teaching or communications. I think this was written in, I want to say, the late 80s to early 90s. So at that time, I think there were probably more jobs available to foreigners than there are now. So some of these guys are working in different fields and careers. But it paints a very vivid and often touching view of Thailand and of living in Bangkok, of what life was like in Bangkok at that time. I found it to be really, really interesting and really touching. A lot of places that are in here I know of or I've been to. There's a section of the book where he's living in a neighborhood that I used to live in called Thong Lor, which is really cool. He asks some questions about some buildings that I've often asked too. So it's a very good, very authentically written book. And I like it because he has a very positive outlook on Thailand, and he has very positive experiences, but he doesn't overly romanticize it. It's not through those sort of like rose-colored glasses, He's very much aware of his outsider status here in Thailand, and he's aware that he's kind of always looking at it from the outside, that there is a degree of alienation there. No matter how long he's here, no matter how much he thinks he understands, no matter how much time passes, you're still not quite fully a part of it. And I think that that's a thread that connects both of these books, is one of alienation. And I think that's a really important thing to consider when we read books about foreign cultures that are written by foreigners. Does that make any sense? So these are books about Bangkok not written by Thais. So there's always going to be a degree of alienation in there and foreignness. And that's really important to have, because without that, you don't have your authenticity. I've read some other fiction. I'm thinking particularly of like a book like Bangkok 8, which is a detective novel, crime detective novel, written by, I want to say he was an American guy, John Burdett. And the main character is half Thai, half American. And it's just like, I just had a really hard time with it. I just couldn't buy into it. And because when the commentary in it too was just like too, I don't know, it's just too over the top. Some of it too romanticized, some of it just too cynical for its own good. But I think that both of these books avoid that problem. And the way that they avoid that problem is by sticking to their own unique identities, their own unique circumstances, and how they are experiencing their life in Bangkok at this time. And very, very different. And speaking of alienation, I mean, this one, Warren Fellows, extreme alienation, living in prisons in a foreign country. This other one, not quite so extreme, but still extreme, but still alienation. Not quite as extreme, but still alienation. And still this sort of always looking at it from the outside. But it's interesting because I think he is able to look at it from the outside and maybe appreciate it in a new way, whereas Warren Fellows, looking at things from the outside, you know, there was really not much, if anything, to appreciate. Pretty horrible experience. So there you go. Like I said, two very, very different books. I should say, if you like true crime, I would really recommend The Damage Done. I think it's a pretty unique entry into true crime. If you're also interested just sort of in maybe crime in Southeast Asia, if you're interested in things about drug policies, drug enforcement, this is presents a pretty unique point of view. And Bangkok Days, if you've ever visited Bangkok, if you've ever come to Thailand, or if you're planning on it, I would definitely recommend this. And if you are coming, give this a read, because you can actually check out some of the stuff, some of the places in this book, and some of the things in this book, and you can go and experience them for yourself, which is pretty cool, I think, actually, to do. So, once again, this has been Please Read Your Book. My name's Carl, and I hope to see you again soon.